Our next talk is Jonathan Carter, our DPL, presenting Striving Towards Excellence.
Hello and welcome to my talk entitled Striving Towards Excellence, something that I think is somewhat ingrained in our Debian culture. Well, what is excellence? I think in simplest terms, it's about being really good at something. And there's lots of things in Debian that we're really good at, and some not so much. My goal with this talk is more to get us as a project to think more about how we can make Debian more excellent and as excellent as possible. So originally, when I started preparing this talk, I had about 10 broad topics. And my talk was about 2 hours long the first time I tried to estimate how long it would be. And I had to cut it back. So I cut it back to 3 topics and eventually added another new one too. So now what we have is basically 4 broad categories that it fits into. There's bugs, mentoring, craft, and games. And games might not seem like it fits completely in this theme, but there's some things I want to say about that and that I want to convince you of. So let's see if I'll be able to do that in this talk. So here's an image of a poster on a mall shop that says, "Mall maintenance shop. We can repair anything. Please knock hard on the door. The bell doesn't work." Now, I first laughed when I saw this. It's somewhat funny, but it's also a bit sad that this sometimes reminds me of us in Debian. And as someone who cares about excellence in Debian, it does pain me a little to say so. But so don't hate me for throwing a little criticism our way. I love Debian, but sometimes it is true that we make all these workarounds and things, and they become part of our culture. Like, this is the way you do it, and no one thinks of changing it because it's a habit and we're used to doing it. And there's lots of things that's been in a weird way for a long time that we should rather fix rather than take the time to make a poster and explain workarounds and things like we often do. So we have to be pragmatic too. Like, if we want to fix every little bug in Debian before releasing, we'll never make a release. There will always be one more thing that we have to fix before it can go out. So yeah, what I find more of a problem is when we have a bug that's very user visible that would maybe even just take a few minutes or hours to fix, and it happens in one release and then again in the next release, because users wonder, like, does anything actually get fixed in Debian? And in the meantime, lots of things do, but those small user visible things can add up and really make Debian look worse than another system when it might not actually be the case. I'm going to show you one example of those. So, wrong screen. This is Xfce in Stretch and Buster. I remember when I first installed Xfce in Stretch, I just happened to know that the run icon was missing. That was always there. And I thought, oh, they'll fix this. This seems like an obvious enough problem. And then Buster got released and it got even worse, because now Xfce shows you when there's a missing icon. So Buster was released with this missing icon for the run program, which was kind of horrible. I didn't like that. I wish that we didn't have to do stuff like this in Debian. And I'm not at all hating on an Xfce team like this. There's literally thousands of this kind of bugs scattered all over Debian. And the fact that it would take just a few minutes to fix, I almost feel like it makes it worse rather than better. And at least this is fixed now in testing. Actually, Xfce is fantastic in testing. They've done a lot of other fixes and polishing on the Xfce desktop too, so the Xfce team is doing a good job. But they're also still looking for contributors and people who help with packaging upstream Xfce. So if you have some packaging bandwidth available, please go help them. So I also want to say human tests remain valuable too, because if you had some automated thing that took screenshots of this and saw if there's an icon missing there, it might see that that missing icon as an icon, and yeah, it might give you like a false positive that it's actually working fine. So I think Antonio's talk yesterday about auto PKG test was fantastic, and I think everyone should go watch that. But at the same time, I also think human testing remains valuable too, like we do when we do ISO testing, because machines won't always find everything that's wrong. I think the combination of both is absolutely important, because if you have to do all the tests that the machines do by hand, it will just waste way too much time. So yeah, that's a funny pick. So this brings me to a topic that I've talked a lot about in the past, but it never got any traction, and that is the 100 Papercuts project. I know some people are probably sighing when they see that, because I talked about it so much in the past and then nothing happened. So the idea is that bugs like this, these small bugs that is actually quick to fix, that give the user the impression that the quality of the system isn't quite as good as it actually is. We call these Papercuts, but because they're very small, but together it's like they can really ruin your experience. And this concept actually originates from Ubuntu. They had a death by 100 Papercuts project, or was it 1,000? I can't remember. And during that period when they ran this project, the quality in Ubuntu desktop really took off, and especially issues that affected users got fixed really quickly. And I think even though it didn't take off, I think it would be good to still get it going. But I'm extremely busy the last while, and I have so many projects in Debian that I don't really have any bandwidth to start another one. So I'm actually asking if anyone's watching that has time to take this over and build on it and get a community around it built and figure out how to do it and take it forward. I would really appreciate that. Otherwise, maybe I'll end up doing it after my DPL term, but that's like 11 months away, and I'd rather have someone do this now than the next year. So what would that entail? Well, it's not a lot of difficult work. So you'd basically have to organize BAF sessions at things like mini-debconf or some monthly meeting on RSC where people get together and talk about it. This could possibly happen as part of the QA team. And there should be some kind of process for nominating bugs, find ways to organize issues like maybe you could have a category for server Papercuts, desktop Papercuts, and so on. And where it should be done, maybe in a Debian bug tracking system or in Salsa. Both have huge pros and cons. Like Salsa is very easy to use for end users, and BTS integrates better with all our existing infrastructure. Other than that, most of this project is just communication, just kind of beating the drum, getting people involved and organizing. So if you'd want to do this, you don't need my permission or anything. You can just go ahead. But if you do want some help, you can get in touch, and I can help you a bit with this as well. But I'd really appreciate it if someone could do this. So that's Papercuts, but there's also a kind of deeper cuts in Debian that also doesn't get attention. This would be the type of things that needs coordination between multiple teams to fix. And I think we should talk more about these as well. I tried to get a good example of one of these, and one that I settled on was just every now and again I see someone complaining that, why do we have to build our packages on a system? Why do we need root to do that? It's kind of a bit silly. There's so many new technologies out there that allow you to do things in sandboxes and namespaces, and we should take more advantage of this in our core tooling. So if something like Xfce can run a complete root from its root, maybe our tools can evolve to eventually use those same underlying technologies that have ended up in our kernel and inside the plumbing layer that might allow us to do things like this without ever needing root or going outside of our home directory. So I think there's some deep cuts that this is just one odd thing. It's maybe not even a good example, but I just want to get something of an example of something that would take multiple teams to coordinate and work together to fix it. And we sometimes need more of this. So where this comes from is I've been reading I've been going through the old DebConf, Debian Devel archives recently, and back in 1998 or 97, it was about people were having a discussion about just identifying problems in Debian, not judging, not even, they weren't even allowed to list solutions for the problem in a thread. You were only allowed to list problems, and that's it. And a lot of good things came out of that thread. And I think at some point we need to list or discover or talk about some of our deeper problems more, and find out what we need to fix them, what type of people we need, which teams should be involved. Just work more on the kind of deep cuts that's more technically challenging, that won't take one person even a week to fix on their own. So, on being busy. This is an image of this picture is a Lego man with round wheels offering to help other Lego people who are pulling a cart with square wheels, and they say, "No thanks, we're too busy." Also sad to admit that sometimes this is me. I keep hearing people talk about wonderful things in Debian, and I just don't find the time to get into it. It irks me that I haven't had time to get into dgit yet, and also auto-PKG tests that Antonio talked about yesterday. But at the same time, also everyone is human, and it's sometimes really hard to find time to improve. But what I'm asking everyone who's watching is to stay aware of this concept and try to make time to learn new things. Because if you just wait for the right time, it just never happens. There's just always something there to occupy your time, to grab your attention, and to steer you away from learning new important things. Also, why I think DebConf and mini-debconf and even the online versions of those are so important. During the talks this weekend, I saw a few instances where people who I thought would know like everything about Debian said, "Wow, I did not know about that, and I did not know about that." And many people learning new valuable things during these sessions that we had. So I think doing more of this kind of thing would also be great just for that, because we're basically making some time to share skills and learn. And I think that's completely fantastic. And that helps us avoid being the person with the square wheels in this picture. So that brings me also to mentoring. Just 1 second. I thought I had notes for the slide. Anyway, mentoring is critically important in improving Debian, because there's so many people who casually wants to help, and we should take advantage of them. And some of them will grow into Debian developers over time as well. I suggest that every Debian developer takes maybe at least even an hour every month to sponsor packages on mentors.debian.net, sponsor packages submitted to BTS. I don't know what the exact number is, but it's huge. There's, I think, no, I don't want to make a guess, but there's many packages, improvement submitted to the BTS that have patches attached to them. And many of them sit there a very, very long time. And I think we should be better as a project to sponsor that and take the contributions that we get from outsiders and make sure that they get either applied or get at least some feedback. And another good way to get to do this is also to work in your team and maintain team-maintained packages. This is working quite well in a number of teams at the moment. And the sponsor request for sponsor RFS bugs is also a good thing to do. Find a request for sponsorship packages in the BTS. But I know I've also talked to some Debian developers who say that they don't like doing this kind of work, because it's sometimes hard and you have to deal with people, and people are weird and difficult to work with. And I don't know, it's difficult. And it was difficult for me when I started working with learning Debian as well. I remember after DebConf 7, I decided I'm going to learn packaging and be really good at everything Debian. So I read through the Debian new maintainer guide, and everything made sense. All the individual parts sounded really good. And then I decided, okay, I'm going to make a package. And I didn't know where to start. It was just so confusing. And I found that the new maintainer guide as a reference works really well. As a guide, I don't think it works all that much. So when people from Debian and Ubuntu also, actually first Ubuntu and then Debian, started to help me with packaging, that clumps of knowledge came together, and the experience that they transferred to me really made everything fit together and work. And I think this image explains that, and why mentoring is also so important in Debian. We can't just depend on our documentation to let people learn. We should really go the extra mile to help people along and guide them through the process of becoming a Debian developer. Come on, I've lost my place. 1 second. So I was talking about mentoring being difficult for Debian developers. I can tell you that when you mentor someone else, your skills will improve as well. Not only in how to teach people, but they'll ask you questions about Debian packaging, or even show you things that you didn't know existed. And I've become a better Debian packager due to the mentoring work that I've done with other people. And there's been lots of things that I saw in packages, and I realized, what did this person do here? Did they screw up, or are they doing something new and interesting that I didn't yet know existed? And then I go look it up and I see, oh, this is actually a thing and it works and it's quite awesome. I should do it more in my other packages. So you will grow when you mentor. It's a good way to spend your time. It's rewarding. It's good for the project. Get out of your comfort zone and do it a bit every month. It's not as scary as it sounds, although it sometimes does get difficult. It's the positives far outweigh the little negatives that come, because now and again you get someone really stubborn who just wouldn't listen, and you wonder, what should I do with this person? Sometimes you feel, should I just keep hammering on the same thing over and over, and if they don't listen, you just told you so, or do you just tell them, go ahead, bump your head, learn it your own way, and eventually, if you realize that you're completely wrong about this, come back to me. So what I've learned in many packages that I've submitted for review before I was a DD, and since then when I started reviewing packages, is that it's important to be neutral. So be careful of your tone, especially in written communications, because things, the way you say it and how people read it, isn't always the same when it comes to written communications. And don't get personal. Don't say something like, what they're doing here is really stupid. It might be, but they might interpret it as something really condescending, and it might push them away from actually wanting to contribute more. I stick to the facts. When you show them that the Debian policy says this and this and this, then they can see that it's not just you being difficult who wants to make rules and make it more difficult for them. You're just really explaining to them how Debian policy works and how they should really put their package together. And say something positive. Sometimes you can thank them for their contribution to Debian. There's other ways you can do it too. What I often also do is say, excellent work. You just had these 4 small things that you have to fix, and once you've done that, I'm ready to upload it. That's sometimes a lot better than just listing 4 things and just the problems, because otherwise they see it as a kind of attack on their work or just negative, and it can also deter them. So always wrap any feedback you have in something positive. It helps a lot for newcomers. So I thought this image would be a nice segue between the topics of mentoring and craft. It's an image of someone drilling way too many holes to try and get the drain pipe through. So sometimes out of necessity, it takes some trial and error to make things work. But once it does, we should remove all the craft and extra things. We shouldn't have too many comments in our stuff and too many broken things that we thought might have worked or not work. When we get something that works, we should make it as good as possible, and leave all the bad things behind that didn't quite work. Maybe document what happened and why it didn't work, but we have so much craft in Debian that it's not really even funny. Oh, I don't know what anyone knows what this image depicts. If someone can make a guess. It's an image of a bunch of Toy Story characters that's been intermingled and mixed together. So if you would guess that it's a Franken Debian that's made out of different releases, that would probably not be a bad guess. But this is actually the Debian wiki. That's what this represents, because it started out as one thing and got more use cases tacked onto it. And there's some namespaces that's really good, especially like under Teams. But overall, for documentation, we've kind of lost the plot there. And I talked to some of the wiki team members about this recently and asked them, what should we do? How can we get people to clean the wiki up and make it better and make it something useful that we can be proud of? And the message that I got back basically was that, well, we need to first decide what we actually want to do with the wiki and what we want to get out of it. And then we can actually put more action in it. So I hope that they actually put together a buff or some session also at the next DebConf and get people involved, talk about it. Because I think, especially for documentation, I think back then there was the idea that it would be like a Gentoo wiki which had excellent documentation at the time. These days, it's more like the Arch wiki that people go to. But do we really need that in the wiki in Debian? Maybe we need to rethink documentation and our wiki holistically, completely at some point, and just take a step back and figure out what to do there. Because I think it doesn't completely make sense anymore. Not a criticism on a wiki team, of course. It's just the way things evolve and happen over the years. Then we also have craft in work needing and prospective packages. Here's a list of 215 packages that are ready for adoption. The oldest is 6,636 days. That's actually quite significant, more than the second oldest package. If you convert that in days to years, that's 18 years old. So that's really a long time for a package to be up for adoption. That's since before Ubuntu even existed. And there's a lot of old packages in WNPP, and the thing is, when new contributors ask what can we do, how can we help Debian, this is the kind of stuff we sometimes point them to. And a lot of this craft, I've sorted it by age, usually it would just be by package name. But it's not really encouraging for new contributors to see things like this. And there's so much stuff in here that shouldn't even be in Debian anymore. For example, there's stuff like, I think it has been removed since I thought about this now, but there was stuff like OpenVZ in there. It might still be in there, that it's not going to be useful for anyone anymore. It's abandoned upstream and it probably has a bunch of security issues. It shouldn't ever be in Debian. We should rather just file removes for those things. Remove all this craft, at least packages that are definitely not useful anymore or can't really be used. And I mean, if KNews is that old, my guess it still uses Qt4 or maybe even Qt3. It probably won't even run on Debian anymore. So we should just RM it and close the request for adoption bug, instead of just having this keep on clogging our system, confusing people, maybe pushing away people who would otherwise adopt some other useful packages on this page. The orphan page is even worse. These are packages that were up for adoption that's already orphaned. There's 1,188 of them. Also, quite a few packages that are more than a few years old on that. So I think we should maybe have a process that I don't know what to put on it. Maybe if a package is orphaned for 5 years, that even seems really long. But I mean, look at what we have now. If it gets over a certain threshold, we should just start thinking of nominating it for removal. And if someone really cares about it, they can step up to maintain it. So yeah, that's it for craft. fix the wiki issues, prune the package list. I had some extra items here because I was going to talk about trends.debian.net, but I forgot to remove this when I removed those slides. My talk was way too long, but I still want to mention trends.debian.net. It's a really cool website maintained by Lucas Nussbaum, and he, in some ways, he tracks craft in there because he tracks a lot of historical things in Debian and what has gotten better and worse. And that website highlights a few places where we need to spend some more energy on. And I think it's a great initiative. And he also plans to add more, track more things in it. So I would suggest taking a look at that for sure. Then finally on to games. And why would I mention this in here? How's games relevant? Well, let's consider Debian on servers. Debian has a great reputation on servers and a huge user base, even without including Ubuntu machines. But you could probably at least link them or consider them too. But Debian is great on servers. And is it because we're good at writing network specifications and implementing them, or creating web servers, databases, scripting engines? No, because we don't even do any of that. We stand on the shoulders of giants, and many of the things that make Debian wonderful actually comes from the upstreams. What makes Debian so great is, as a server platform specifically, but also in other areas, is all the work we do to integrate all that upstream work and make it work well together. It's still wonderful, and people take it for granted how you can just type to install something like a complicated database engine or web server, and within seconds it's configured and running, and you didn't even have to do much to do that. But I digress. Just like Debian has emerged years ago as a good server platform, we're actually entering an era now where Debian is really making strides towards becoming a really good gaming platform, almost to the same level that it's a good server platform. And I know many people will be completely skeptical about that when I say that, but if I can manage to nudge your opinion on that by 10% by the end of this talk, then I'll be happy with that. So historically, free games have been vastly inferior to their non-free counterparts. But recently, free games have also found some great niches. So consider FreeCiv that this screenshot is of. It's a fun game. And of course, it's not even in the same league as fancy as the newer proprietary versions of it. But year on year, it keeps on changing and improving. And I usually play this game on my flights on the way from DebConf to home. And every year, it's nice to see all the new stuff they've just added. It's not the same game it was a year ago, and year before that, and year before that. The rules get updated, new nations and languages and cities get added. It keeps it fun to come back to every time and play again. And I think this is a nice aspect of free games that they can keep on evolving. Like if you consider the original Civilization 2, that FreeCiv is similar to, it's always stuck being the same thing, but the free game can continue to grow and evolve, and that's wonderful. And we're getting into stages where certain games are growing large enough communities that they really start to rival some proprietary games. This is also a 3D WebGL version that someone made of FreeCiv. It's not a version, it's just an interface. So it uses the exact same game engine. It's the same game. It just looks completely different. You run it in your browser, and it's rendered with more 3D technologies. And then there's games like Zero AD. They also change things up a bit. Also a game in Debian. This is still a relatively new game, even though it's in development for a few years. I think they don't consider it version 1 yet. But what's noteworthy about this game is that not only are they writing a great game and have grown a big community behind it, they also have their own funding, what would I say, their own funding platform and ways to fund developers to work on it. And they're also a project with the SPI, like Debian is. I think for bigger games, we might see more and more games like this that that's managed and treated more like an important piece of service software, more than just one person working on a game in their spare time for a little bit every year. So these are like 2 free games that I find notable, but there are actually a lot more in Debian, like Tux Racer and Mindtest, and the list is just growing. The list of free games that's actually worthwhile that kids want to play is growing immensely in Debian and in the free software world, and that's already good. It's not everything, because I want to move on to the proprietary games as well, which I know some people don't want to play, and that's completely fine as well. But I'm a big gamer and play lots of proprietary games as well. As much as I enjoy the free software, this is a game called it's a screenshot from a game called Detroit Become Human. It used to be a PlayStation 4 exclusive up until last year, and then they went through lots of work to port it to Windows. And I first saw this last year at a friend's house on a PlayStation 4, and I was just blown away by the detail of all the graphics and artwork, and just how smooth and while it runs on the PlayStation. And earlier this year, I saw it was ported to Windows, and there's a Linux gaming website which claims that you can just run it on Linux and it will just work. And I was skeptical about this. Downloaded the demo version initially, and eventually bought the full game, but the demo just ran flawlessly. It was so easy to install, and let me just clarify. This is not the Linux version of the game. This was the Windows version of the game that ran on Debian, and it was just so smooth. And the best of all, it was just a few clicks to install it. It took me about a minute and a half of clicks, and then another few minutes of download went by, and then I could play the game. It was fantastic, and it's smooth, no bugs or artifacts, and it just worked. So it's really great. So how did it get that easy? Because I mean, with most fancy proprietary games that comes from Windows, you have to tweak one and mess with some DLL settings and do a bunch of other things, and it's not really quite easy. So this is where a tool called Lutris comes in. They basically make a bunch of recipes for games, manage the tweaks that you have to do, and then you can install a game into each game into its own unique wine bottle, and this works really well. So for games from Windows, you just select the recipe from the website, the URL handler that will open the Lutris apps on your Debian desktop, and from there it takes care of the rest and sets it up in its own contained environment. I would even consider sandboxing all of this even a lot further as far as you can, because you never know what proprietary games and stuff do. Maybe even have a dedicated computer for that. But it works great. I've been playing lots of different games and trying them out, and it just works completely fine. Lutris is currently new. The person who's maintaining that and uploaded it to new is called Stefan Leshnik. He's also been helping me with the next slide that I'm going to talk about. It's called game mode. Now, this concept I first saw in Windows. When you load a game full screen in Windows, it goes into what's called game mode. It turns off notifications, make sure your performance governor is set to the right one. I don't know what it's called in the Windows kernel, but it makes sure your computer uses all the resources it can for your game, also prioritizes a process, deprioritizes everything else, just sets up your environment so that your game will run as good as possible and you don't get any annoyances. So there's this company called Feral Interactive. They made a game mode for Linux as well, and it does a bunch of things there. I have it on my slide. It does optimization, including for CPU governor, IO priority, process niceness, kernel scheduler, screensaver and everything, GPU performance mode. GPU is a big thing on Linux because by default it just always uses low power mode, even when you're working it hard. So this makes sure that it uses the right GPU governance mode while you're running a game, and it sets it back to default after you finished your game. So some games know about game mode and will automatically invoke it when you run them, and some of them you have to invoke it manually. There's also a GNOME shell extension that I maintain in Debian that will show you when game mode is active. And if you check the package description for game mode, there's also a way to test that it's working on your system. So there's ways that Debian is getting better, like some of these things that I mentioned in the last two slides, that's making it easier to load an ever increasingly large amount of both free games and if you have a huge library of old proprietary games, that just gets better and better. But in Apple, on Macs at least, there's a few things that are happening. Like they're trying to abandon 32-bit on macOS, which is kind of probably a good and a bad thing. But one of the victims is games. There's running older games on Macs is becoming kind of more and more difficult, and there's been lots of 32-bit games that have been released even up until relatively recently. But another big hit that Apple had about a month ago is that Valve has announced that Steam VR will no longer work on macOS, and this is quite a big chunk of the virtual reality user base. And they announced that they're only going to work on Linux and Windows from now on and focus there. So while things are getting better on Debian, it's also getting a little bit worse on other platforms. So I think for gamers, Debian is emerging as a good, safe place to run and keep a big your big library of games, because usually when something runs, it more or less keeps on running. I think our compatibility for old games have become better than it is on Windows and Mac, and it's getting to a point where you could say Windows is better if certain things are your priority, and Linux is better if certain other things are your priority. But it's no longer the wash it was before. I think in the past, gaming on Linux was kind of no, this doesn't work. It's not a good idea, and most serious gamers wouldn't consider it. And you see more and more gaming websites talk about Linux and getting excited about it, and getting Windows users to at least dual boot. There's so many kids out there that dual boots just to get an extra 3 or 4 frames a second in their game, and for them this is enough reason to dual boot and reboot every time they use another game, just for those extra few frames. And there's some chance for them to get involved in Debian too eventually, I think. And that takes me to my next slide. Slides actually, because Debian is not only growing into a great distribution for playing games, but it's a fantastic platform for making games. All the packages we include really offer an extensive and impressive array of tools that you can use to create your games. So Inkscape finally released version 1 of their Inkscape vector drawing program this month, and I think that's really good news. And even more fantastically, it's already even backported to Buster backports. So if that's not excellent, I don't know what is. But Inkscape is an old staple of the free software drawing stack, so I'm actually glad that they finally released version 1, so congratulations to them. And then there's Krita, also another app that now has a foundation behind them and lots of momentum. They also have huge traction of game designers, whether it's free or proprietary game designers, and lots of good documentation and training videos on their site. Then there's also a gaming engine that I learned about. I've read about them previously, but I learned a lot about them during FOSDEM this year. They're called Godot. It's a free 3D and 2D game design studio engine runtime that lets you create really fancy games. And guess what? All of that is packaged and ready in Debian too, including its runtime. So if you want to write games for Debian with Godot, getting them packaged and actually shipped in Debian if they're free software is quite easy. So I think this platform is going to do big things and allow lots of not only proprietary game developers, but people who want to make good free games flourish and do fantastic things. So I'd also love it if we could have another online mini-debconf in the future that's focused on gaming. So maybe half of it focused on the games and exploring them, how to run them, what's good and what you can do, and how it compares to other systems, and maybe have another half of mini-debconf for developing games where we get upstreams like Godot and Inkscape and Krita, and there's so many others as well that could talk on how to use those tools and how they're good for gaming and so on. Maybe we could make it more of a tutorial weekend in some ways as well. And that way we get some more new people and maybe even younger people interested and excited about Debian. But overall, I think in terms of excellence, Debian is really emerging as a great game platform, both for running and creating it. And the same way we are for servers. And there's other areas that this is happening in as well. But I think people aren't always as aware of how good Debian is becoming a gaming platform than it is. So I just wanted to shed some light on that in this talk. And on the topic of, since I mentioned MiniDebConf, I know we all like to sit in front of our computers a lot, but at the same time, getting together, we are social creatures, and humans like getting together with other people. And as we've learned in this weekend, doing things like a mini-debconf in real life is just so much easier and in many ways more convenient. But if we can't have that, then something like a mini-debconf online is a good second choice. And I think it can also supplement main debconf events with things like themed ones like the gaming weekend, which might be a bit more difficult to do in real life. So this photo was taken last year after DebConf 19. It was a group photo at the barbecue. And here was probably one of the last get-togethers we've had before lockdown started everywhere. This was the FOSDEM mini Deb camp that happened before the FOSDEM event. So hopefully we'll have these not too far in the distant future again, but I do hope that the online mini-debconf idea will continue to evolve and grow and get better with time as well. And with that, I think I have time for at least one question.
Yeah, so there are two questions so far. The first one was, who can decide about stopping a request for adoption or cleaning things?
Who can decide? I think anyone. What kind of decision is needed there? I mean, what does stopping a request for adoption mean?
I think it's in terms of, you were talking about closing RFAs and filing RM bugs.
Oh, I think if it gets that old, just do it. I mean, if a package is up for adoption for, I don't know, more than 2 years, is someone really going to care if you close the RFA and file an RM for the bug and explaining why you're doing it? I don't think it will be a problem. I think people can just go ahead and probably should go ahead and do that.
The second question was, would it be possible to have an online learning platform within the Debian project, something like Linux Academy, say Debian Academy, for people who want to teach and do official courses on any Debian-related topic?
Was that Jatanu asked that, my namesake? I think I think that was probably him, because we were talking about this previously. Yeah, I think that is a good idea. It's a good idea. It's just getting it off the ground is a lot of work, and maybe we can start small and build on that. Having sessions like this where people teach and other people can watch and learn and interact with might be a good start. If you're talking about academies, I guess you care about certification and things like that as well, which might be a lot more complicated. But I think if you have a big idea like that, it's usually a good idea to figure out how to start small and then gradually build on that.
Okay, I haven't seen any more questions from IRC, but we can just hang on a bit for those.
I think we're just about running out of time as well.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks a lot for that.